Today, at 7:33, the last train to freedom leaves. A locomotive driver said that sentence on a December afternoon in 1961. Quietly, to the people he trusted most, in a small town north of Berlin. That evening, an ordinary passenger train pulls out of Oranienburg station, 8 carriages behind a steam engine, and rolls through the winter dark toward the sealed edge of West Berlin. To the state, it is a commuter run like any other. But scattered through those carriages sit 25 people who know exactly what that sentence meant. And up front, 2 railwaymen are about to aim more than 100 tons of moving steel at one of the most heavily guarded borders on Earth. Then they are going to climb into the coal bunker of their own locomotive. Because if the guards open fire, coal is the only armor they have. The driver's name is Harry Dieterling. His wife is on that train. So are his 4 children, who believe they are going to visit their aunt. Around them sit passengers who suspect nothing, and men in uniform who suspect nothing either. The conductor, a border policeman, a customs officer. The state is riding along on its own hijacking. And when somebody finally understands what is happening and lunges for the emergency brake, nothing is going to happen. The brakes are dead. The driver killed them himself that same afternoon. Tom, forgotten Europe. By the next morning, what happened on that line had produced a classified report by the Stasi, East Germany's secret police, addressed to the 3 most powerful men in the country. That document survives, and we are going to read from it, because it records almost hour by hour how a quiet railway worker stole an entire scheduled train in plain sight of the state that was watching him. This is how he did it, and it is what that state spent the next 28 years trying to do about it. Start with why a father of 4 points a steam engine at a border. In August of that year, East Germany had sealed itself shut overnight, barbed wire through the middle of Berlin, then concrete, then watchtowers, and standing orders to shoot. Harry Dieterling was 27, an engine driver from Oranienburg, working out of the Pankow depot in East Berlin. When the railway passed around a declaration for its men to sign, a statement approving of the border closure, he refused. The state did not shoot people like him. It ground them down. In November came the verdict. From January, no more locomotives. He was to report to a brickworks in Zehdenick instead, for what was called political re-education. His son remembered the wage on offer, 1 mark a day. His fireman was in the same vice. Hartmut Litchi, a friend, still a teenager, was facing conscription and did not want to carry a rifle for this state. Then, working his roots, Dieterling learned 2 things almost at once. First, at Albrechtshof, the last station before West Berlin, the old Berlin-Hamburg main line still ran physically unbroken across the border. 4 times a day, guards swung open a steel gate for the interzonal trains, the long-distance services between Hamburg and Berlin that were still allowed to cross, and locked it again behind them. Second, it was about to end. Word was coming down the line that the crossing would be cut and the interzonal trains rerouted. Dieterling had been thinking of going between Christmas and New Year. Now the window was days. So he did something that must have burned. He went to his superiors and bent the knee, or let them think so. To prove his change of heart, he volunteered for unpaid extra shifts and asked, helpfully, for runs toward Albrechtshof. The railway, pleased that re-education was working before it had even begun, agreed. On the 5th of December, he took over a passenger train in Oranienburg that was not his by the roster. He had talked his way onto it. The rostered fireman was told he had the evening off. Hartmut Litchi climbed onto the footplate instead. Before departure, the conductor noticed 2 small oddities. The driver kept busying himself at the tail of his own train, where a driver has no business being, and the train left 1 minute late. What the conductor could not know was that in those minutes, Harry Detterling was working down the carriages, quietly putting the emergency brakes out of action. Meanwhile, his passengers boarded the way you board, when your life depends on looking bored. Separately, at different stations, in 2s and 3s, carrying almost nothing. His wife Ingrid with the children, his mother, his sister's family, friends. A last handful nearly missed it. They threw themselves into a taxi and raced the train to Falkensee, the final stop before the border. So hold that picture. A steam train slides out of Oranienburg into the dark. 25 people aboard who know. A conductor, a border policeman, and a customs officer who do not. Dead brakes, one try, no second chance, and a crossing that will be gone within days. A steel gate is waiting up ahead, and this train is not going to slow down for it. Subscribe before it gets there. Stories with the files to prove them are what this channel is built on. Now, back onto that train. For most of an hour, nothing happens. The train stops where it is supposed to stop. People get on and off. At Falkensee, the taxi party scrambles aboard, breathless, and the doors close behind them. And Harry Detterling opens the regulator. Albrechtshof is supposed to be the end of the line. The unwitting passengers are reaching for their bags. Instead, the platform lights come up fast and then sweep past. The train tears through its own terminus, past staring guards, past a signal burning red. On this line, a red signal could ask a driver to stop. It could not make him. Behind him, the conductor and a transport policeman finally understood. They pulled the emergency brake. Nothing. They pulled it again. The train did not even shiver. In the carriages, the people who knew threw themselves flat between the seats. Detterling's son remembered his mother stacking suitcases against the compartment wall as armor against bullets. He remembered one more thing. As the train cleared the station, his father let the whistle scream into the dark. A warning sent ahead, so that no railwayman on the western side would be standing on those tracks. Then Detterling and Lishi crawled back over the coal into the bunker, pressed themselves down into the dust, and let their locomotive run at the border with nobody at the controls. Ahead, in the dark, a steel gate closed off the last meters of East Germany. The locomotive hit it at full steam. The gate tore aside. No shot came. The guards were taken so completely by surprise that by the time anyone understood, there was nothing left to aim at but tail lights. Around 8:45, by the Stasi's own clock, the train rolled onto West Berlin ground, and Detterling climbed forward and brought it gently to a stand with the locomotive's own brake. About 500 meters, a third of a mile, past the border. Steam settled near a street called Segefelder Weg on the western edge of the city. Doors banged open, and out into the December night climbed families, children, a grandmother, every single person Harry Detterling had promised to carry across. Nobody on that train was so much as scratched. What do you do 30 minutes after driving a stolen train into West Berlin? Detterling and Lishi climbed down, black with coal dust, ran to the nearest telephone in a housing estate on the edge of Spandau, and called the police, who needed some convincing that a full steam train from East Germany was standing on their tracks. Then came headlights, uniforms, and by midnight, the escapers were on their way to Marienfelde, West Berlin's refugee reception center. Within days, the pictures of the train went around the world, and reporters were queuing up for the engine driver who had outdriven the Iron Curtain. Now count heads with the Stasi, because its report did. Roughly 50 people had been on that train. About 30 of them stayed in the West. 19 walked back east along the track bed. Among them, the conductor, 3 other railwaymen, the border policeman, and the customs officer. The state's entire onboard apparatus trudging home through the dark. 7 of those who went back, by the count kept in the West, were ordinary passengers, people with parents, jobs, whole lives on the other side that could not simply be dropped on a Tuesday evening. And inside those numbers is a quiet, remarkable group going the other way. Passengers who had known nothing, who had boarded a commuter train in a dictatorship and were handed, without warning, the choice of a lifetime. No luggage, no plan, no goodbyes. Just a dark field in Spandau and a decision. Some of them simply stayed. The train itself was not so lucky. And here the story turns strange because of one of the Cold War's oddest arrangements. The railways of West Berlin were operated by East Germany's own state railway. So on the personal order of the Reichsbahn's president, a locomotive steamed out of the Grunewald depot in West Berlin, coupled onto the escape train, and hauled it home. At 11:15 that same night, the train stood in Albrechtshof again, as if nothing had ever happened. 2 hours. That is how long the most embarrassing train in East Germany stood on Western ground. Everything else could not be pulled back. The next morning, work crews were tearing the rails out of the ground behind the gate. The interzonal trains from Hamburg were rerouted to cross at Griebnitze on the far side of the city. The local commuter service was simply stopped, its passengers put on buses, and the old Berlin-Hamburg line, once one of the proudest main lines in Germany, now ended at Albrechtshof in a heap of torn track. Think about what that is. A country ripping out its own railway in December at speed to stop one driver who was already gone. It worked in the bleakest possible way. No train ever broke through the Berlin border again. But while the rails were still coming up, a 4-page document was already climbing the chain of command. And the men it was addressed to were not railwaymen. The morning after, the Ministry for State Security filed single information, number 758 of 61, a serious border breach by means of a passenger train at Albrechtshof station. The distribution list is 3 names long. Ulbricht, East Germany's leader. Honecker, the man who had organized the building of the wall. Stoff, the deputy head of government. Delivered by way of Mielke, the head of the Stasi himself. One missing commuter train, read at the very top of the state. I have read a fair amount of Stasi paperwork for this channel, and what strikes me about this file is that it is not really a manhunt document. It is an autopsy. The state is dissecting itself, trying to understand how it was beaten by a man with a timetable. Start with the smallest humiliation, the name. The report admits that the driver's identity could only be established after lengthy inquiries at his own depot. For hours, the German Democratic Republic did not know who had just driven a train through its border. The man had planned so cleanly that even his absence was tidy. Then the file works through the failures one by one. The conductor never properly took over the train in Oranienburg. He was supposed to hear from the wagon master that the train was in order. Instead, Deterling told him the wagon master had already reported to him, and everything was fine. That sentence was a lie. Nobody checked it. The driver loitering at the tail of the train, the 1 minute of delay. Each detail harmless in the moment, and each one, in hindsight, a footprint. And Ulbricht read all of this. The man who, months earlier, had assured the world that nobody had any intention of building a wall, spent part of his morning on the anatomy of a missing commuter train. The investigators also traced the route itself and found that the railway had done Deterling's work for him. The signals at Albrechtshof had no automatic train stop. That equipment had been stripped from the line after the war and carted east as reparations. So a red light was a request, nothing more. And the single switch between the station and the border was set in a geometry the file describes almost with resignation. Approached from the east, it funneled any train onto one track only, the main line to West Berlin. The state's own steel was on his side. Then the brakes. 3 people, says the file, pulled the emergency brake as the train ran for the border. So had Detterling's sabotage actually worked? Here the document makes a confession you could frame. It admits this could no longer be determined, because once the train was hauled back, the railway repaired the brakes before anyone examined them. In its hurry to make everything look normal again, the state destroyed its own evidence. And then comes the sentence that turns the whole file on its head. The Stasi records that the transport minister, Kramer, and the president of the Reichsbahn, Arndt, had already discussed securing Albrechtshof against exactly this, a breakout by rail, and had decided against it so as not to endanger the interzonal traffic. The gate Detterling smashed was not an oversight. It was a decision taken at minister level and filed away. Every railwayman on that border had to be perfect forever. Detterling had to be right once. If you are wondering why the file names no one to punish for that, it answers the question without meaning to. Its final pages are not about guilt at all. They are a schedule: which day the rails would come up, which day the buses would run, which day the trains from Hamburg would take the southern route. The state's real reply to Harry Detterling was not a verdict, it was demolition. There is one more line in the file, and it is easy to read past. Investigators noted that Detterling's wife and children had been away from the family flat since that afternoon. One day after the escape, the machine was already reconstructing his family's final hours in the East. Who left when? Who knew what? Who helped? The Detterlings were out. The file on them was just opening. To be fair to the men who wrote it, the file contains one accusation with real teeth. The interzonal train from Hamburg had been due through Albrechtshof about an hour later. If Detterling's locomotive had derailed at the gate, 100 tons of steel at full speed, with dead emergency brakes behind it, that scheduled train would have run into the wreckage in the dark. He gambled, with his own children aboard. He gambled that steel would beat steel, and he happened to be right. I think the story is allowed to stay uncomfortable there. That document sits in the archive today, under the reference number the Stasi gave it, and anyone can read it. 60-some years later, it is still the best witness to that night, the enemy's own minutes of a defeat. Because the Stasi did not accept that a man simply gets away. Remember, West Berlin in 1961 was an island, a half city, walled in, sitting deep inside East German territory. Getting out of it safely meant one thing: an airplane. And Harry Detterling was suddenly the most famous escaper on that island, with his face in the newspapers and his name in a Stasi file. So when, within days, friendly strangers began appearing in Marienfelde, men nobody knew, warmly inviting Harry out for a drink in town, he never went. And the West Berlin authorities decided not to find out what those invitations were. On the 9th of December, 4 days after the escape, the whole family was flown out of the encircled city to Frankfurt, deep in West Germany. East Germany, meanwhile, dealt with Harry Detterling in his absence. Its press framed the escape not as a flight, but as a criminal attack. And a court back home passed sentence on the man who wasn't there. The researchers in Falkensee, who later assembled his story, put it at 13 years in the penitentiary. The West told the story differently. By 1963, there was a feature film in West German cinemas dramatizing the run. It gave the locomotive an invented number, and the poster a hero's glow. The family, by the Falkensee account, even turned down an offer to start over in America. They wanted to stay German, which meant staying findable, because the letters came, for years, threats and promises that the state had a long arm and a long memory. The family moved and moved again under cover names, and lived, by their own account, under police protection until 1989. Sit with that for a second. The escape took minutes. Being escaped took 28 years. That part of the story never made the film. The chase people wanted to watch was over before the steam had settled. The real one ran quietly for decades, through mailboxes and moving vans, and children learning not to say where they were from. The children grew up inside that shadow. His son Manfred remembered the night itself in fragments, 50 years later. How strange it was that a visit to the aunt began after dark. How his school satchel had been packed with fresh laundry instead of school books, and nobody told him why. That boy grew up to work a border himself, a West German customs officer on the Swiss frontier, waving people through a line his father had needed 100 tons of steel to cross. And Harry? Harry did the only thing he had ever wanted to do. He drove trains, now for the West German Federal Railway, at the far southern end of the country, at Radolfzell on Lake Constance, about as far from the death strip as a German engine driver could get. For nearly 3 decades, he ran ordinary trains on ordinary timetables, and if you ever rode one of them, you would never have known. He retired in 1989. The same year, the wall he had once outrun came down, and the state that had sentenced him began to dissolve, taking its verdict with it. In May of 1990, Harry Detterling stood on East German soil for the first time in 28 years. And in 1995, when the torn rails at Albrechtshof were finally joined and the old Berlin-Hamburg line reopened, he was there, invited back by the Falkensee account as a guest of honor to the exact stretch of track where a steel gate had once flown apart in front of his locomotive. The men joining those rails were repairing a wound that a state, by then extinct, had cut into its own network to stop him. He had outlived the wall, the sentence, the ministry, and the country. He had promised his family the last train to freedom. The state made sure he kept his word. It ripped out the rails behind him, and no train ever crossed there uninvited again. One more date, and we are done. Harry Detterling broke through the Iron Curtain on the evening of the 5th of December. The Stasi report that made him an enemy of the state is dated the 6th, his birthday. He turned 28, the morning the most powerful men in East Germany learned his name. He spent that birthday free. He died in 2010 at 76 at Lake Constance, a retired railwayman with a story his neighbors probably never quite believed. And today, trains run through Albrechtshof every day, in both directions, and nobody so much as looks up from their phone as they cross the line where the gate stood. Which is, if you think about it, everything he was asking for.